The events took place in a bright room. The girl was drawing on a photo, and when she was asked if she was ready to tell everything, she froze. It was a hospital, and a doctor was standing next to the patient and asking what kind of place it was. Suddenly, the girl looked up and looked at the doctor. He handed her a piece of paper and said that she could write everything on it if it was more convenient for her. The patient looked down, and then she took the paper, saying that she would write about everything better. She started by writing class 1 to 9 inches. Ji-hoon-an was lying on the ground, showing no signs of life. Next to him, Men-jun-woo knelt with his hands above his head. Ji-yin screamed when she saw what happened to her friend. Their friends were taken hostage. Ji-yin asked what it all meant. Suddenly, her pupils dilated sharply. After that, a loud shot was heard from Sinji, and then another click of the rifle and its muzzle was pointed at the teenagers. Sinja said they heard him and asked not to be forced to repeat himself. Ji-yin asked her classmate how he could do that. A smile appeared on Shinja's face. He liked becoming the worst version of himself. Then Se-yeon calmly agreed. She said it was in her pocket and ordered me to take it away. Ji-yin tried to be outraged. Se-yeon rubbed her pocket, trying to prove that she had something in it. Sinja replied that he did not trust them and ordered them to stand still. Then he looked back and gave the order to Yura Choi. After her last victory, the girl felt impunity and power, so she easily agreed to the task. And she approached Se-yeon with an assault rifle. She held up her hands to her classmates, showing that she would not harm them. Yura Choi was already mentally devouring what was in Se-yeon's pocket. Suddenly her expression changed abruptly and she screamed. After all, many grasshoppers jumped out of Se-yeon's pocket and attacked Yuri Choi. She even threw away her weapon out of fear, and she fell straight to the ground, plopping down loudly. Se-yeon realized that this was a chance and she had to take the weapon. Yunsan Lee did not understand what had happened. Ji-hoon-an gritted his teeth in pain as he continued to lie there. And then I realized that this was his chance, when Yunsan let his guard down. So Ji-hoon-an just pounced on him, knocking him down. Mang-jun-woo realized what was starting to happen, and he had to make an effort as well. Meanwhile, Ji-hoon-an and Yunsan Lee were struggling, and the latter was knocked to the ground. Yunsan Lee was furious because he was used to winning with numbers and weapons, but he had no strength. Then he was told that it was the end, and Yunsan Lee's expression changed dramatically. After all, now he was facing the muzzle of a rifle grabbed by Mang-jun-woo. Now the tough guy was in the shoes of those he had insulted and intimidated, but without a weapon, Yunsan Lee was nothing. Se-yeon grabbed Yura Choi's rifle and also pointed it at the offenders, saying that it was over now. Yura was scared, because Shinja would definitely not praise her for such a mistake. Se-yeon asked if they wanted to shoot each other and die together. Yunsan Lee raised his hands in the air in fear and remained silent. Shinja stared intently and remained silent as well. Then he abruptly turned around and ordered me to leave. The others did not understand what was happening and stood in a stupor. Yunsan Lee asked again, asking if they were just giving up. This pissed Shinja off. He turned around and you could see that his muscles were starting to show on his face, and he asked if there was a better option. Yunsan Lee trembled at the mere sight of their leader. He said he understood and agreed, telling the others that they were going back. Finally, he turned around and said that nothing was over yet, and asked me to remember his words. The grandfather only came to the teenagers and said that everything had been handled without him this time. Se-yeon called for Myung-woo to make sure he was okay, but Ji-in ran screaming to Ji-hoon-an, interrupting her classmate. The teenager was lying on the floor, still not fully recovered, but heroically helping his friends. Ji-hoon-an began to say Se-yeon's name as if he wanted to tell her something. Then he suddenly apologized, which shocked the girl. It shocked Ji-yin too, and she became stunned. Then she clenched her teeth and hid her face. The events moved back in time to when the teenagers were still young. After school, they decided to leave the talkies. Everyone else caught on to the idea and agreed to go for the delicious treats. Little Se-yeon was not happy, she just looked down. Little Ji-hoon-an was walking beside her. Se-yeon apologized without looking up, saying that she would go with them another time. Ji-hoon-an looked at his friend. The others tried to convince Se-yeon that she never went with them. Suddenly, someone said they had a treat and suggested we all go together. It was Ji-hoon-an, and he smiled at Se-yeon and said that she had to go too. The events moved to the school. Their classes 1-9. The students were sitting at their desks. The teacher was not there. Ji-hoon-an turned to Se-yeon and called out to her joyfully. Then he whispered that they were in the same class and he was happy about it. Se-yeon pretended that she didn't care and that it was nothing unusual. But in fact, she was happy about it, and the girl was all smiles at the thought. Then I heard slow footsteps, those of an elderly man. It was Mr. Park. He walked into the classroom and said that he would mark the attendees. The first was his favorite, Sin-ja Kang. Next up is Hansen Kim, then Ji-yin Kim, Ji-hoon An, Sua An, who painted her lips with gloss, Don-soo Lee, Yoon-san Lee, Ye-jong Lee, who covered her mouth with her hand, Man-jun Woo, who was lying on the desk, Sharon Jong, who also dyed her hair, Yura Choi, Chae-in Hyun, Jang Sung-hong, and the last one was Si-young Han. After roll call, Mr. Park said he had something for the students on the waiting list and told them to go to the teacher's lounge. After that, I addressed Si-young personally to see if she had heard. Ji-hoon An turned and looked at his friend. The other students began to whisper about what this privilege meant. Shin-jae Kang smiled and replied that it meant terrible poverty. And then he added that in other words, a beggar. Meng-jun Woo did not get up from his desk. Ji-hoon An hid and looked around, feeling ashamed for some reason. The events moved to the store. The creaky door opened and the customer said hello. It was Se-yeon. She said in an uncertain voice that she had seen the store looking for employees. The man replied that she was still a student and asked if Si-young thought she would have time. She smiled and vowed that she would definitely find him, and if they hired her, Si-young would do her best. And then she became quieter and said that she hoped they would be able to pay her in cash because she needed to receive a benefit. The man sighed sadly. Then he replied that in that case he would not be able to pay her the minimum wage and asked if Si-young would be okay with that. She didn't quite understand, but she agreed because she had no other choice. The man agreed and said that Se-yeon could start tomorrow. These words made the little girl happy and she sewed. He added that he usually doesn't hire apprentices, but he made an exception for her because he understood that it was important to Si-young. The girl thanked him. Among the shelves there was Meng-jun Woo, who was silently pretending to choose something. And then he came back when Si-young said goodbye to the man. Then Meng-jun Woo reached for his drink as he continued shopping. He brought it to the checkout to pay for it. The cashier told him that there was a special offer for this product. Buy one, get one free. The events moved to a bad-looking neighborhood. A group of people were standing there smoking. Among them were Shin-jae, Sua An, Yoon-san Lee, and Sharon Jong. The latter two discussed whether Meng-jun Woo was from their class, but they didn't even remember his name in particular. Sharon Jong said he was cute as he took another puff. Yoon-san Lee grumbled that he was not interested. Sharon Jong asked to be invited to hang out with them next time. Meng-jun Woo was walking alone on the road. Suddenly, a man in a military uniform called out his name. The teenager was speechless when he saw him and called him father. He said he came in because he had some business at home. Then he said with a serious expression that he was glad to see him and asked how his new school was. For some reason, he remembered Shinja's words. When he called Se-yeon a beggar, it seems that he was impressed. But Myung-jun Woo told his father that he was older when everyone was the same. Then my father told his partner to wait for him in the car. The private accepted the command. Then he saluted. But suddenly, his father ordered him. The ordinary soldier was trembling. The man was outraged and asked who had taught him to salute like that, commenting that it was terrible. Meng-jun Woo observed how his father behaved and how he was feared. After that, the teenager turned around and left, while the man continued to lecture the soldier. The father did not even notice that his son had left, and Meng-jun Woo thought that he would not miss anything and noticed everything. The teenager was sick of it. Suddenly, Meng-jun Woo noticed something, and it caught his attention. He saw Si-young and her grandfather, who scolded him not to collect it anymore. She said she now had a job, so there was no need for her grandfather to work. Meng-jun Woo was very impressed. The events moved to the school. The class laughed at Hansen. Yoon-san Lee continued to insult him. He asked him to stop in a quiet, uncertain voice. Yoon-san Lee asked what the teenager had mumbled to him. Hansen began to panic after his words. Then Yoon-san Lee turned to Myung-jun Woo, who was lying on the desk. But the teenager did not even get up when he called him and continued to remain silent. Yoon-san Lee invited him to hang out with them after school, but Meng-jun Woo refused without raising his face. Yoon-san Lee was shocked by this answer, because everyone in the class wanted to hang out with him, or so he thought. Sharon Jong laughed, saying that Yoon-san Lee was rejected. Myung-woo remained silent, not moving from his seat, and Yoon-san turned around and left. Then he turned around and called the teenager too moody. Meanwhile, Myung-jun Woo and Si-young stood at the school's exit. Suddenly, it started to rain heavily. But he came back because he was surprised by something. It was Si-young, who came out from under the cover and was about to leave. He called out to her, but Si-young did not react and just ran in the rain. Myung-woo was very interested in why she was in such a hurry and where she was going. Then I heard the heavy footsteps of a healthy man. It was Myung-woo's father, and he recognized him. The father replied that he had decided to take his son because he hadn't done so for a long time, and it was raining. So they went together, and they asked Mung Jun-woo if he had made any friends at the new school. Several situations with his classmates came to mind. How they smoked, but they spent their time after school in a useful way. Mung Jun-woo realized that these were people he would not want to have anything to do with. He just agreed that he had made friends. Then he looked at his father and addressed him. Suddenly, their umbrella broke free and fell to the ground. After that, Mung Jun's eyes widened dramatically when he saw his father. After all, he struck a pose and saluted, thanking him for his service. Drops of rain ran down my father's arm, but he stood there and did not run for an umbrella. Mung Jun-woo remained silent, but the shock did not leave his face. The father told his son that he should always be grateful and respectful of such people. After that, the shock disappeared from his face and sadness appeared. His grandfather and Se-yeon walked in front of him, and she helped him push the cart. My father said that this grandfather was a veteran of the Korean War, and he realized this because of the badge on his cap. The old man was pleased that someone else respected veterans and bowed. After that, he and Se-yeon moved on, carrying a heavy cart, and Mung Jun-woo stood there in shock. They had an umbrella, although it was wet. But despite the heavy rain, his father shone brighter than the sun. The events moved to the old building. Shin-jae and his father were with her, and he told his son to thank his fate that he did not have to live like that. These words were deeply imprinted in the teenager's mind. Se-yeon walked with her grandfather past Myung-woo and his father. I was pushing a cart in the rain. The rain was running down her face, but it did not bother the girl. Shin-jae agreed with his father. He realized how lucky he was to have a good life. The events moved to the shop where Se-yeon now worked. The customer held out his card to pay. Se-yeon worked at the cash register, and the customer said they were in the same class. The girl replied that she knew that. It was Mung Jun-woo, who said it was time for school and asked if Se-yeon was going. To which she replied that the supervisor said he would be late, so the girl decided to replace him before school. And she wondered why she was explaining this to him at all. Man Jun-woo bought another drink that was on sale and shared it with Se-yeon. The girl replied that she had not eaten sweets, but she was shocked by this act. But Meng Jun-woo did not listen to her, saying that they would talk some other time. Se-yeon tried to say that she didn't like sweets, but her classmate just turned around and walked away with a wave. Se-yeon stood in a stupor, not understanding what was happening. Then another customer came in and said hello. It was Ji-hoon An. He was surprised to see his friend Se-young Han. The teenager immediately attacked with questions about whether the girl worked here and whether it was time to go to school. Se-young replied that she was going to work a little longer and would come back in the evening. Then she held out the banana milk that Mung Jun-woo had given her and offered it to Ji-hoon. He asked what it was. Se-young said she didn't eat sweets. Ji-hoon An asked if he would feel bad about it later, and Se-young said indignantly that if he didn't want to, he didn't have to. After that, Ji-hoon An stopped showing off and took a banana milk and said they would meet at school. A smile appeared on Se-young's face. Ji-hoon An walked past his classmates who were sitting in the same place smoking. He looked at his banana milk that Se-young had given him and was happy. Suddenly, he was called and turned around. I saw my classmates. Yoon-sun Lee asked if they knew each other. Sharon Jong responded by asking him if he was stupid because they were all in the same class, adding that they were in the same class, so they were friends. Ji-hoon An heard this and wondered if they were really in the same class. Suddenly, someone touched him on the shoulder. Ji-hoon An recoiled, not expecting such closeness. It was Ji-yin, and she replied that it was nice to meet her and introduced herself to her classmate. And then she asked if he had banana milk in his hands. Then she said that she adored him. She asked if she could take it. Ji-hoon An stood in a stupor at being spoken to and handed over his drink. Yoon-sun Lee asked the teenager if he wanted to hang out with them after school. And Sharon Jong asked if Ji-hoon An ever smoked. He replied that he had never done so. Yoon-sun Lee asked why such a cool guy didn't smoke. Ji-hoon An was embarrassed when people called him cool. Then he was handed one cigarette, the last one in the pack. Shin-jae said that this one had a match and Ji-hoon An had to smoke it, and the teenager agreed. The events moved back to the store, where Se-young again said that the goods were on a 1+1 promotion. Mung Jun-woo told her to take a free one. Everything happened the same way. Se-young took the milk. She stood there in a stupor but realized that Meng Jun-woo would not take no for an answer. Then Ji-hoon An came, and Se-young gave this milk to him again. Then Ji-hoon An gave it to Ji-in, and she responded defiantly at first. And then I looked more closely and noticed something. At the bottom was a note that they were in the same class and an offer to be friends. Ji-yin melted down. It embarrassed her. I thought about how bad Ji-hoon-an's handwriting was, but it was actually Myung-jun-woo's. They all met again in front of the school to smoke a pack of cigarettes. Ji-hoon-an felt like one of them. He was accepted. It got dark and the events moved to the store. Ye-jong Lee said she heard that there was no point in coming here. Yun-sul Lee was outraged, asking what to do because he had run out of cigarettes. He said that he thought he was addicted because the teenager seemed to be experiencing withdrawal. Yun-san said this proudly, but no one believed him. Ji-hoon-an watched in silence, but he knew that Se-young worked in the store. Sinja said that the manager here was strict, and they all wore school uniforms. And then Ji-hoon-an told them to wait for him here. This surprised the teenagers, but they couldn't wait to see what would happen. Ji-hoon-an had a smug smile on his face, proud of himself and feeling cool. So the teenager walked into the store and the doorbell rang. Se-young greeted him, but fell silent in mid-sentence when she saw him there. She looked at her classmate. The others watched from the courtyard, and Yun-san Lee asked if it was the beggar from their class. Ji-hoon-an told Se-young that he had a request. The girl was already alarmed and asked what had happened. Ji-hoon asked her to sell him what was behind her, hinting at the cigarettes that lined the entire closet. Se-young was in a stupor because she didn't know that Ji-hoon-an smoked at all. The teenager smiled at her, saying that they were friends. There was a sign at the cash register that prohibited the sale of tobacco to people under the age of 19. Morning came and they were shouting at Se-yeon. The manager shouted that it was impossible to sell cigarettes to minors. Se-young didn't know what to say, and cold sweat was pouring down her face. The manager asked how Se-young repaid him for his kindness. He added that he saw everything on the surveillance cameras. Outside, Se-yeon's classmates were watching and eavesdropping. The boss said he shouldn't have hired the apprentice. Then he shouted that Se-young had been fired. She tried to apologize, but it was all in vain. Meanwhile, my classmates were smoking in their seats. There were a lot of them. The whole class smoked, as it turned out. Ji-hoon-an also did not care about Se-young's fate. He had a smile on his face because he was so cool. The events moved to residential buildings. Man-jun-woo called out to Se-young. The girl was furious and did not answer. Mung-jun-woo kept asking her to wait. Eventually, Se-young asked why he was hitting on her, since she didn't even know him. Mung-jun-woo replied that they were in the same class, so they were friends. Se-young denied it, saying it meant nothing. Myung-woo looked at her and smiled, saying that she was small but energetic. Se-young noticed this and asked what made him laugh so much. Mung-jun-woo replied that it was very small. And then Se-young took a swing at her classmate, asking if he wanted to die. Suddenly, I noticed something and stopped. She saw Mung-jun-woo, who called out to her. The rest of my classmates were nearby, and they asked out loud if it was the beggar. Yun-san Lee said this and was told that it was very rude. Sua-an laughed, and Sharon Jong said that it seemed like Se-young had heard Yun-san Lee. But the teenager did not stop, asking if it was true that the beggars were begging for food. Se-young was silent and just looked at them. Mung-jun-woo was also silent, but he was shocked by the situation. Suddenly, Shin-jae asked Ji-hoon-an if she was his girlfriend, and then he made that stupid forced smile, as if he didn't understand what the question meant. Ji-hoon-an didn't even know what to say and was in a stupor. Suddenly he laughed, telling me not to say such nonsense anymore. He added that Se-young was more like his cigarette courier. Then Yun-san Lee asked everyone if they wanted to see a gag. His cigarette was over. Then Yun-san Lee left her, and she flew straight to Se-yeon. She jumped away from the girl's briefcase, and it fell by her collar, reaching her body. Se-young screamed because it hurt so much. Yun-san Lee said he was reaching into his briefcase, and then he answered that it was past the basket, with a calm face. And at that moment, a foot hit him in the face. It was Man-jun-woo. Yun-san Lee flew backward, blood from his face flying after him. Meng-yun-woo yelled at him and called him a bastard. Se-young didn't have time to step away from the cigarette and was shocked by this act. Ji-hoon-an was as silent as a rat, and Yun-san Lee fell to the ground, landing loudly. Meng-jun-woo looked up. After that, someone grabbed him. He threw Jang Seong-hyun's hand away, but then he hit Ma Young-woo in the face. The teenager also fell to the ground. He barely managed to get up. He was attacked again, this time by Shinja. This short girl had always only known how to attack the weak. After that, he punched Men-jun-woo in the face. Shinja felt strong because he was beaten and abused at home. And then 3 guys attacked poor Myung-jun-woo while he was lying there, and they started beating him hard from all sides. Ji-hoon-an was shocked, but he remained silent, standing in a stupor. Suddenly, he was pushed by Se-yeon. She was holding a garbage bag. She swung it and hit Yun-san Lee and the others, and the garbage flew everywhere. My classmate stood there all dirty and smelly looking at Se-yeon. Then she said on the phone that she wanted to report the fight. It seems it was the police. Se-yeon said that a group of thugs were beating a man. Sinja snorted as if he didn't care. But inside, he was very afraid of what his father would do to him for reporting him to the police. And then he ordered everyone to leave. Ji-hoon-an looked at Se-yeon with big eyes. He was scared. Then he left with the others. The events moved to the school, namely in grades 1-9. Se-yeon was there, followed by Myung-woo. The teenager told his classmate that she came in early today with a smile on her face. Se-yeon returned but was silent. After that, she asked if Myung-woo was okay because he looked bad. The teenager briefly replied that everything was fine and asked how Se-yeon was feeling. The girl put her head down and said that she was fine. She had banana milk on her desk. Se-yeon replied again that she didn't eat sweets, and then she took a drink. She looked at Mung Jun-woo and asked him not to carry it for her anymore. The banana milk came with a note that said, "I'm with you." Myung-woo ignored these words and asked Se-yeon to come over to him because she still had scratches. Se-yeon asked if Myung-woo really thought she couldn't afford the patches. She added that it was because she was a beggar. Myung-woo got scared, saying that's not what he meant. And then Se-yeon hit the teenager with her fist, but not too hard. Mung Jun-woo grimaced, and then Se-yeon grabbed his shirt. And then the teenager blushed and started thinking about his old grandmother. Se-yeon said that she couldn't take it anymore, and Myung-woo looked down at her. The girl pressed closer to him. Then Man Jun-woo saw a scar on her neck from a burn caused by a cigarette butt thrown at her by Yun-san Lee. He silently put a band-aid on it, and Se-yeon cried bitterly. Myung-woo thought that all this time she had already been an outcast to others. Meanwhile, the events shifted to reality, where the wild beast ran very fast as if running away from someone. Se-yeon ran after him, and next to him is Taepung the dog. The beast felt that it was about to come to an end. Se-yeon caught up and thought about the fact that she had very little ammunition. Although she was small in size, she had the physical stature to match any giant. She held it up high, deciding that she couldn't waste ammunition, and you need to kill the animal in a maximum of 2 shots. So Se-yeon took aim, clicked the rifle. Her eyes were full of concentration. She was ready. Then the shot, and right on the money. The wild beast fell to the ground, and Taepung ran after it to finish the job. He bit an animal, so that she could not run away and move. Se-yeon came closer to him, and then another shot rang out. Meanwhile, Grandpa and Ji-yin were walking along the lawn, and he said that he had even learned something from her. He told Ji-yin that nothing would change if nothing was changed. The companion looked down because the old man was completely right. Suddenly they met Se-yeon on the road. Meanwhile, the events moved to the cave. Screams and sounds of a fight were coming from there. Yun-san Lee was shouting and calling someone a woman of easy virtue. They seemed to be talking to Yer Choi. He kicked her, accusing her of being the reason they lost their rifle. But Yun-san Lee forgot that his rifle was also taken away. Sharon Jong ordered him to stop because he was giving her a headache. Sua-an said that Yer Choi was not the only one to blame, as Yun-san Lee also lost his weapon. She added that it was because he fell like an idiot. These words infuriated him and he screamed. Sharon Jong suggested that we be realistic and start with the fact that they all came to this island because of Yun-san Lee. Sua-an supported him, saying that if he hadn't ducked behind the wheel of that boat like an idiot, Donsu, Jae-in, and Hyun-song wouldn't be dead. Yun-san Lee replied that they all laughed when he made the joke, and now they say it was his fault. Then he told them to choose their words, his tone sounding threatening. Yejong Lee ordered them all to calm down. And then she said that it wasn't actually Yong-san Lee who killed them, but rather... And then Shin-jae intervened, interrupting Yejong Lee. He asked her who she was going to drive at. Yun-san Lee intervened, saying that it was enough to talk about it. Yejong Lee fell silent. Yong-san Lee said that in desperate times, desperate measures are needed. Yejong Lee replied that she just wanted to say that everything that was happening was not normal. Then she turned around and left. Yun-san Lee asked her where she was going. Shin-jae remained silent, also waiting for an answer, but Yejong Lee did not even return to them. She just looked to one side. Mr. Park's face was covered in bruises and blood, and he had been severely abused. And then she felt very sorry for the teacher. She looked down in shame. The events moved to the place where everyone smoked during breaks from school. Cigarettes fell to the ground and someone called someone a snitch, saying that he had betrayed them in a great way. A beaten Hansen was sitting on the ground. He was looking at the ground and barely breathing. His neck was bruised, as was his face. Shin-jae held cigarettes in his hands and smiled as he looked at Hansen. The poor man could barely hold himself up. He could not stand up. He stammered out an apology to Sinja. Henson asked them to stop and swore not to tell anyone, but they interrupted him and simply kicked him in the face. Shinjae looked at Hansen like he was shit and ordered him to shut his mouth. Others were watching, and everyone was shocked by this aggression, to put it mildly. Shinjae was beating and shouting that he would take them both down with Jae-in, even if he got hurt himself. Ye Jong-lee told him to stop because Hansen could really die. And at that moment, Sinja elbowed her in the face. Ye Jong-lee fell to the ground. Her nose was bleeding and Sinja called her names, telling her not to even dare to point at him. He looked at her with a crazed look and added that he would spare her a fig. Meanwhile, it was raining heavily on the island. But inside, the meat Se-yeon had caught was already ripe. She said she cut it with a stone because they didn't have a knife and the teenagers were salivating. Se-yeon held out a piece and said that he needed to eat a lot to recover. She said this to Ji-hoon An, and the teenager was very embarrassed by this attention. Mung Jun-woo approached her and was indignant. Se-yeon whispered in his ear that she would give him a bigger piece. My grandfather also took some meat and praised it, saying it was a great job. Taepong also enjoyed the food because he was working hard too. Meanwhile, someone was walking in the rain and loudly sneezing. It was Yura Choi. She was screaming for help. Se-yeon asked the others if they had heard it too. Yura Choi was screaming and running away, calling for help. Suddenly, someone clicked a gun. Yura Choi was frightened when she saw it in front of her. It was Se-yeon and Myung-jun Woo, and he told Yura Choi not to move and to stand still. She fell to the ground and begged them not to kill her, swearing that she was very sorry. Mung Jun-woo asked if she had the courage to come here after everything that had happened. He added that Yura Choi was lucky that he did not shoot. Se-yeon didn't say anything because Myung-woo was doing a good job himself. Yura Choi stammered and tried to explain that she had no choice and that this was the only way she could survive. Myung-woo interrupted her and ordered her to shut up and get out. Yura Choi asked me to listen to her, saying that they would kill her. Meng Jun-woo remained silent and held the machine gun. Then he asked what happened and why she had to be killed. Yura Choi began her story, but then she sniffed around. I asked if they had roasted meat. So the events moved to the cave to the teenagers. They watched Yura Choi devour a piece of meat like an animal. My grandfather watched silently and agreed to everything. Stroking his dog, Taepong, Yura Choi ate her portion in a second. Myung-woo ordered her to tell him what happened. She remembered what she had promised because the thought of food had completely clouded her mind. And then she looked down, blushed, and thought about how cute Mung Yun-woo was. The teenager ordered her to speak again. Yura Choi stammered and said that they lived there like in hell. Se-yeon asked again, because it seemed to her that there was nothing difficult about stealing other people's food. Yura said that they were desperately trying to get something edible, like fish or wild plants. But it turned out that they didn't know how to do anything, and they extracted almost nothing. Except for cockroaches. Sharon Jong caught one. She ate it right away without even cooking it. Sua-an attacked her, saying that it was her turn, and Charon replied that if she caught it, it was hers. They started fighting, and Sinja was watching. He was starting to get annoyed. At that moment, someone stood up abruptly. It was Ye Jong-lee, and Yun-san Lee asked her where she was going. She just looked back at him. Then she said from behind her back that she was going to see Se-yeon. Shinja was furious and asked what it meant. He asked again what Ye Jong-lee was going to do. Then she suddenly stopped because Sinja's tone spoke of danger. Ye Jong-lee asked him what he thought, adding that it was better than starving to death. Yun-san Lee yelled at her, asking if she had lost her head. Ye Jong-lee rudely told him to shut his mouth. The teenager stood up and asked again. Ye Jong-lee started screaming. She was completely out of control and said that it was because of him that they were stuck on this island. She went on to say that Yun-san Lee beat his classmates, killed them, beat Mr. Park, and thought everything was fine. Shinjai was watching and he looked away at Jang Song-hong and Yura Choi, who were sitting sadly on the ground. And then in the other direction, where Sua-an and Charon Chan fought. And then look ahead. Ye Jong-lee turned around and left, saying that she didn't care if she had to kneel before a beggar, that is, Se-yeon, she would definitely survive. Yun-san Lee ordered her to stand. Suddenly, someone put a hand on his shoulder. It was Sinji, and he suggested that the teenager figure it out on his own. He was full of aggression and insanity. Eun-jung Lee loudly recoiled. It was turning back, and it was raining heavily. Shinjae followed her and called out. She was almost crying and asked them not to persecute her, saying that they all got to her. Sinja said in a calm voice that they had to talk. Yejeon turned around and shouted for him to stop chasing her. Shinjae did not hear him. and asked him to wait. Ye Zhongli screamed once more for him to leave her alone. She said she didn't care anymore, even if they all starved to death, and called Sinja a repressed psychopath. At that moment, the teenager pulled out a knife. Se-yeon asked Yuri Choice what happened next after the rain because they were on the same island and understood the weather condition. She began to stutter, gathering her words together. And then she looked at the food and said that when Sinja came back with the food, Se-yeon immediately asked where he could find food at night. Yuri Choi confirmed and clarified that it was meat. When Shinja brought it in, the others were shocked. It was strange that he had found meat somewhere at night. Yun-san Lee tried to ask where Shinjae got it and how, because he was unarmed. But the teenager handed them a piece and told them to eat first, and then he would tell them everything. In his crazy head, he had memories of that conversation with Ye Zhongli. After all, he returned without her. Shinjae's gaze was manic and frantic, scaring everyone. Suddenly, Yuri Choi screamed, because it seemed that she understood everything. In the joint photo, Ye Zhongli's face was now painted over. Shinja's t-shirt was dirty and red. He took it off and twisted it to wash the stain. Then he wiped his face. The downpour was so timely and washed away all the evidence as if nothing had happened. Ye Zhongli was lying on the ground looking at Shinjae, and he was standing over her. But Ye Zhongli didn't blink. She just lay there with the same expression on her face. Se-yeon put her hand over her mouth and screamed loudly. Everyone was shocked. She said it just couldn't be. Yuri Choi replied that she wished Se-yeon was right and that she had imagined everything, but there was definitely meat. Her grandfather interrupted her and said that they had to make a decision. Se-yeon asked what he meant. Meng Junwoo also returned, waiting for an explanation. My grandfather replied that they all understood what he was talking about, adding that it was too dangerous to live on the same island with him, and they had to strike first. Se-yeon asked if her grandfather meant that they should have struck first, that is, killed Shinjae and the others. My grandfather said that was what he was talking about. He stroked Taepong's dog and explained that this was the only way they could guarantee their survival. Meng Junwoo was outraged because killing was not an option. Grandpa said that they were all hungry and going crazy, so he wouldn't be surprised if they were about to attack them. And then he added that he had seen enough and had had enough. They were worse than wild animals. The grandfather added that he did not want to think about killing, but rather it was part of survival. The teenagers denied it, saying they were classmates. My grandfather replied that he could not force them and told them to decide for themselves and just let him know. Se-yeon hesitantly replied that she needed time. Myung-woo turned to her and tried to get outraged that she hadn't given up and considered the idea at all. Grandpa interrupted him, telling Se-yeon to think, but to remember that time was worth its weight in gold here. And then the girl just said yes. Then Yuri Choi spoke up. She adjusted her glasses and asked if this meant she was now one of them. She was very uncomfortable, and Yuri Choi tried to make a wry smile. Myung Junwoo stood up and shouted, asking how she ever had a conscience, since she had done so much evil. Yuri Choi tried to explain that it was just a way to survive and nothing more. She had no choice. But Meng Junwoo stood his ground. Then Yuri Choi pointed to Ji-in and Ji-hunan and asked what the difference was between them and her. Meng Junwoo got angry because he realized that he was cornered. Then he put his head down, gritting his teeth. Se-yeon broke up their argument, saying that was enough. She then told Yuri Choi that she had to do her job. The teenager's life immediately sparkled with cheerful colors, and she broke into a smile and thanked her friends. Then Meng Junwoo stood up abruptly. Then he looked at Se-yeon and asked if they could talk outside, and she agreed. My grandfather watched them leave and remained silent. The teenagers walked in silence. Se-yeon was the first to ask what happened. Meng Junwoo remained silent and looked down. Then he told Se-yeon that he knew she was very kind. He added that compassion could not interfere with making the right decision, because their lives depended on it. Then he said that Se-yeon was their captain in this little war, and the girl asked why she was the one. Myung-woo said that even if Yuri Choi had deceived them, his grandfather was still right about Shinjae. He added that they had to make a decision as soon as possible. Se-yeon thanked him for taking care of her and promised to think about it. The teenager looked at her with sympathy, because she had to make a difficult but fundamental decision. Meanwhile, the teenagers in the other cave devoured the meat without a second thought. Even Mr. Park ate it. They cooked it, and it was so delicious. And Shinjae was sitting there watching with pleasure. Yun-san Lee turned to his friend and offered him some more food, but Shinjae said he was already well fed. Sua-an turned away and asked what happened to Ye Zhongli, where she went. The teenagers realized that they hadn't even noticed that she was gone, and began to resent the fact that Ye Zhon had betrayed them as well. Yunsan Lee added that Yura Choi also disappeared somewhere. Sua-an agreed, but then asked who needed her. Shinjai suddenly drew out a long E. Everyone paid attention to him. And then the teenager said that Yejong Lee was no longer with them. And then he added that she had been killed, to be precise. Yunsan Lee screamed, asking who did this to her. Sua-an and Cherin Chong asked if it was the beggar who did it. They were sure it was her. Shinjai replied that he was talking to Yejong Lee when Se-yeon appeared out of nowhere and attacked him. So he hid from her, slipped into a cave, stole the meat, and brought it here. The teenagers stared in shock at Shinji in silence. He said they were all in mortal danger. He added that Se-yeon was going to kill them all. Then he took a piece of meat, while the other teenagers were outraged that Se-yeon was crazy and had killed her friend. And then he put the meat to his mouth, said that this was why they had to attack first, and then began to eat a piece of food.